Since mid-March, Reverend Shane Spangler, a seminary classmate of mine who lives in Kansas, has been offering prayers from windmills. He climbs to the top of various windmills in his backyard or nearby and offers a prayer. It's his thing. It was this image that I kept coming back to as I pondered the Pentecost texts from this week. Shane grew up in that area and knows his stuff. During one of the videos, he explained that there is a braking system on windmills that prevent them from overdoing the job they are tasked with. For instance, many farm windmills provide the power source to pump water into the stock tanks to feed the herd of cattle. Without a windmill brake, the water would overflow. There must be a way to harness and control the power of wind, right? That brings us to the morning of Pentecost, which was the Jewish feast holiday celebrating the early harvest of wheat in May or June. It was then that crowds had gathered in Jerusalem. Crowds were gathered to celebrate this abundance, and the scene changed. The Holy Spirit descended on the crowds. You have now heard two renditions of the story this morning. First, for the children of all ages, a retelling of the story through Legos by my colleague Reverend Chris Marishuk. Then you heard our very own Frank Giampetro deliver the story as the poetry that it is. Through the Holy Spirit, each person understood one another in their own language. In this area, when people weren't necessarily in this great chaos where likely no one was listening particularly careful, and many people were raising their voices. It was hard to understand anything in the chaos, but the Holy Spirit descends and provides the spirit by which all can understand each other. Wind is frequently a metaphor for the Holy Spirit. In this case, the wind is harnessed and directed enough to tame the chaos and offer understanding. This week's call to worship, opening prayer, and confession are all written by Marraine and appear in her book, An Improbable Gift of Blessing. When I wasn't finding what I wanted in other sources, I reached for this much-loved source on my desk. Her liturgy for today spoke to me particularly strongly for the times we are in and our great need for the presence of the Holy Spirit. I was particularly drawn to her phrase, fervent urgency, that appears in the confession. We live in a time of fervent urgency. We have now journeyed through the entirety of Easter season, isolated by a pandemic that keeps us separated. We arrive at Pentecost in the spirit of discernment of how we can continue to be church in spite of our isolation. When I was called to Old South, people were very curious about the church I was going to. I shared the website. I told stories about our encounters so far. Even with that, with what I had offered, one woman continued to ask, "But what about the church? I want to see the church." Again, I offered pictures I had of beautiful faces and the activities of the church. "No," she kept insisting, "I want to see the church." Then it dawned on me, and I delivered. I sent her a picture of the physical building of the church. That was what she was looking for. Dear ones, our church building is an amazing piece of architecture and has hosted our mission and ministry for more than 100 years. But you, the members and friends of Old South, are truly what makes church what it is. And right now, there is a fervent urgency to renew our purpose on this Pentecost, to be the church in the world. We are in desperate need of the Holy Spirit to make sense of the world. A call for peace isn't quite what is called for. In fact, we seek a better way to understand each other. We need to listen more carefully and hope that the power of the Holy Spirit will help us carry that understanding back out into the world. In the great crowd in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost, tongues as of fire appeared on people's heads. Each one understood each other in their own language. We are told to preach with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. This week is a prime example. This week, the language of fire, those tongues of fire, speak volumes. This morning we come together in worship after another night of violence and unrest across the country. Honestly, I have lost track of the cities where there is unrest. Buildings and vehicles are on fire. There is looting and rioting. There is confusion about who is doing what. But here's the thing. People have put their lives at greater risk to step out and protest in the midst of this pandemic. We don't just have a public health crisis of COVID-19 that is contagious in close proximity. We have a public health crisis of racism in America. Calling for peace is not enough. Calling out for the Holy Spirit for a greater understanding is a start. Being sad and angry and grief-stricken and confused, all of those are appropriate too. From our seemingly protected bubble of a rural area in one of the whitest states in the nation, it can be easy to turn a blind eye. With all that we are, and our greater call to mission and ministry, I would say there is a call of fervent urgency to help us understand that pain and grief. It is a call to the Holy Spirit that we might understand each other in our own language, that we might understand a history that we don't fully comprehend. It is a call to be the church in the world. Rioting is the language of the unheard and voiceless. We need a new language of the Holy Spirit. Look at it blowing the curtains behind me. This morning, I want to leave you with a couple things. First, there's a program this evening, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, a requiem for Ahmaud Arbery, by several clergy of the United Church of Christ. The title is from the book by James Cone, an African-American theologian. I'd also like to open up Zoom office hours tomorrow afternoon to provide a place for discussion. Finally, this morning, I would like to share a project I was part of back in March, reciting the United Church of Christ Statement of Faith as a reminder of what the church can be. So may the Spirit of Pentecost descend upon us and provide us a greater understanding of how we might be church in the world that desperately needs us. Thanks be to God. Amen.